Welcome to the Dean's Conference Room here on the campus of Pepperdine University's Graduate School of Public Policy. I'm Pete Peterson, the very grateful Dean of this institution, and I'm delighted to have you join us in the next of our Roots of Political Economy conversations. Throughout this series of videos, we've been exploring foundational thinkers and policymakers, exploring different avenues and approaches to the subject of political economy, the role of the government in our economy. These debates go back centuries. And for today, we'll be looking to the 20th century and two American policymakers, President Herbert Hoover and President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who engaged throughout the 1930s in a series of debates framed and titled in this terrific book, The Two Faces of Liberalism, How the Hoover-Roosevelt Debate Shapes the 21st Century. Of course, the importance of conversations like this is not just to look back into history in discussions and debates that may have shaped a certain era of a bygone time, but to understand how those debates, even going back 90 years, really do impact today's policy and political debates. And so for this and all of our discussions, I'm delighted to welcome back into the Dean's Conference Room our Doxon Professor Emeritus, Dr. Gordon Lloyd. Dr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Dean Peterson, for the invitation. I'm just delighted to be here to talk about political economy through the centuries. And we finally get to the 20th century, and let me reinforce what you said. We go back to come back. We don't go back to stay back.
Well, let's begin at least with a little bit of historical context, Dr. Lloyd. For those who might know of President Hoover and might know of President Roosevelt, seeing them as essentially opponents in a series of political and economic debates, it might surprise some to know that they actually knew each other fairly well in the early stages of the 20th century, and even at certain points, one supported the other. Give a little bit of background on these two men.
Well, after World War I, Hoover engaged in a relief program for the Russian people, and both the Republicans and the Democrats praised him for the work that he did, and were eager to see him run for presidential office. He decided to become Secretary of Commerce, and when Coolidge decided not to run again, Hoover became the Republican nominee, and Roosevelt worked his way up the ranks. Being governor was one of the natural stepping stones to being a presidential candidate. So through the 20s, they knew of each other and they understood what was sort of unfolding. By 1928, we had, in a sense, there was a return to normalcy.
Right.
And what after the progressive era, in which normal things were turned upside down, but it was you could see it through the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendment. Then came the war. And after the war, the question was, can we just calm down for a bit? And I think there was a general agreement of, let's calm down a bit. So the progressive agenda got moderated. And by the way, Hoover was within that progressive mold. And so there's a whole story about, shall we say, moderate progressives, and then immoderate progressives who really wanted a capital P progress, and progressives who wanted to expand the role of government, but not in the Marxist sense of taking over everything.
Right.
And Roosevelt himself was in that picture of how to be normal when the world is abnormal, in the sense we've made fundamental changes at home through like prohibition, through women's vote, income tax. So those are big issues to absorb within a continuation. And and then war. And war is a huge upheaval.
Right.
And so that would be the background. I would say both of them involved in politics. Both of them understood the importance of coalitions, the importance of representing that the political parties were dominant and central. So I mean that would be the American landscape into which both of them emerged. Hoover did not come from a wealthy family, but he worked his way up. Right. And so he was a sort of an American hero in that way, and very generous.
Yeah.
Roosevelt came from a very privileged, what the word we'd call it today, privileged background, and yet he went into politics and went in with the gang, to fight and win. You can't become governor of New York by just saying,
asking for
look at my patriarchal background.
Right.
He says, what can you do for me lately?
Yeah.
So both of them understood politics.
Yeah.
And both of them understood American politics. I think both of them understood that big things had happened, including at home with 4 amendments, including one which wasn't working very well, the Prohibition one.
Right.
And then the dislocations that took place because of war. I mean, it was the first world war,
right,
in which America was involved. And we didn't have a standing army at that time.
Right.
So the 20s were sort of, how do we get back on our feet?
Right. Now, it's worth noting, I think, at least at this early stage, and it has a bearing on this conversation around political economy, that the progressives that we're talking about were really in both parties. In fact, they were often seen more on the Republican side, progressive Republicans.
That's right.
And here we are in California. The progressive Republican movement in California was a dominant political movement here in the early stages of the 20th century. Talk a bit about the Republican progressive movement as it relates to these economic issues and the role of government.
Well, I think for me, the link between republicanism and progressivism at that time was we like things to be business-like. We want things to be based on merit, so that you don't like the spoil system. It's not what you know, it's who you know.
Right.
And the Democratic Party was full of the spoil system. You get off the boat from Europe, bam, you got a spoil. You're in the spoil system. Here's your card.
Right.
Go down the street. So I think the Republicans wanted to clean things up. They've been right, and the progressives are that way. So there's a sort of a natural link in terms of cleaning things up. The Democrats became progressive, I think, more in terms of the understanding that what you see in front of you need not always be, and that there was a concern for the poor, and using the ballot with regard to solving poverty or dealing with poverty,
right,
and dealing with the underclass. So there's that. And a lot of the Democrats. I mean, I don't think you would find many workers voting Republican or considering themselves to be Republican. That was the natural base for the Democrats. So the nature of the progressivism is slightly different. For example, there's a populism in progressivism, like the primaries, the rotation in office.
That's right.
Term limits, talking about term limits, right? Which the Democrats caught on to. The cleaning up part. By the way, the Republicans cleaned a lot of things up, but it was done through a nonprofit. It was done as part of what it meant to be rewarded in the system, that giving back.
Right.
And so you have a lot of these private clubs, private organizations providing help for women. I mean, I can certainly understand why the Prohibition Amendment came in, because of, there's a whole coalition, there's a whole set of things that go on there. But Hoover's position on Prohibition was, it's there, therefore obey the law.
Right.
he wasn't particularly interested in prohibition as a major issue. But he was interested in the fact that it was a law and it ought to be observed and it ought to be obeyed. Yep. Roosevelt was happy to have prohibition go away. And so prohibition, which I hadn't really thought deeply about in terms of the way in which you're posing it, how does prohibition, that's my take on what you're getting at. Yeah. How does prohibition have an impact on the 1920s? Yeah. And the interesting thing is that those 4 amendments are together. So you could say, like, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution sort of defines the closing of the founding, the completion. I don't mean closing in the sense of it's over, but I mean it's complete. Yeah. The roots have been laid. And then you get this whole problem with the Civil War. And so you have 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which sort of conclude about what the Civil War was about and shift and become part of the story. Mm-hmm. And then the next big thing is the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendments. And those all come in a bundle just before war. And if you go to strategy, the question was, which one do we, because you can't do all 4 at one time. So what are you going to do? And a lot of the folks thought, the progressives thought, you can't get prohibition on alcohol until you get women voting. Mm. So and then it turned out that you did get prohibition passed without women voting. Mm-hmm. So there's a whole complexity. I mean, we could spend a lot of time on that complexity, but I think those 4 amendments, so summarize, see, that's what Americans were willing to do. I'm a great proponent that if you really want to understand America, try to understand not these disparate bases where we have now, but rather that the American story is the creation and the sustaining of the deliberate sense of the community. Mm-hmm. And the deliberate sense of the community, in my mind, comes out unabashedly in the amendments. An amendment to the Constitution, because it requires 2/3 of the House, right. 2/3 of the Senate, right. 3/4 of the state legislatures, or popular vote. Now that's just pretty much as far as you can get to a consensus, and still have division, live with the division. Right. So that would be my background on this Hoover Roosevelt, and then you get the election of 1928.
Right. And so that leads us into that 28 election. I want to pull the first quotation from our discussion and have you respond to it. This from Hoover in his nomination address in August of that year. And his focus on the time was on the importance of equal opportunity for all Americans. And again, we're having a conversation here around political economy, the government's role in the economy. And I'm going to quote this passage, quote, "Equality of opportunity is the right of every American, rich or poor, foreign or native born, irrespective of faith or color. It is the right of every individual to attain that position in life to which his ability and character entitle him." So talk a little bit about, this is the end of the Roaring '20s, and at the same time, Hoover is saying that this really needs to be about opportunity for all. How is Hoover conceiving of that?
Well, part of the progressive approach was to suggest that equal opportunity is sort of a myth. And the myth is, if you go back to the 19th century, and this is sort of that dream, and that's why immigrants are coming here, they're coming for opportunity. I mean, I would say the key word in that equality of opportunity is the word opportunity. They're coming for opportunity. And you're going to, with opportunity, you're going to get some inequality. But what inequality is permitted, that's the amount of inequality that you've acquired through your own ability. Mm-hmm. So it's not this privilege of Europe handing it down. The reason why I own this land is because my daddy owned the land, and therefore I just own it because of inheritance. Mm-hmm. But rather, what he's getting at is something during the 20s. This concept of equal opportunity, his campaign speech. He has gone to Europe. He's seen the ravages of war. He's come back, and he sees what the Europeans' answer to it is: the growth of the state. Mm. And you've got Mussolini starting. You've got communism in Russia. Mm-hmm. You've got all of that notion that somehow the world as we have known it is no longer, or it no longer works.
Yes.
And so Hoover is saying, well, what is it about America that is attractive and workable, and it is equal opportunity? So he points, and he calls that Lincoln. So it's the party of Lincoln, yeah. Republican Party. So he associates it with Lincoln and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So that is a genuine equal opportunity. Those are three genuine equal opportunity amendments. Right. And now there's the 19th Amendment with women, so you've got equal opportunity now for women. Mm-hmm. Okay? So you've got that sort of understanding with the backdrop of what is happening in Europe. And one of the things that the progressive did was in terms of this myth. They said, I'll tell you what is real in America. It's not all men are created equal. Even if you change it to all men being generic for including women. I mean, it's if you look around you with your own eyes, you know darn well people are not equal or not born equal or into the same situation. So this idea that Americans get off the boat, immigrants get off the boat, and this is the land of opportunity, this is the land of hope. Part of the progressives would say, that's just a myth. This whole story that you can pick yourself up by the bootstraps, get off the ship and get to be somebody. I'll tell you what the real story is. It is unequal opportunity. That a bunch of people like Rockefeller and et cetera, including California, all the railroads and whatnot, they're the robber barons. They're the ones for whom opportunity exists in America. And so there's this background. Do we have equal opportunity? Look at these barons, etc. And that is a very, very famous thesis about a story about America in the 19th century. It's called the Frontier Thesis.
Right.
Turner
Jackson.
who wrote this. The reason why America, in any way, is the land of opportunities, not because of the idea. It is because there's a lot of land. Mm-hmm. And where there's lots of land, there's lots of opportunity. And in 1890, the Bureau of the Census, for the first time, stopped looking at that issue. And so this thesis of the last frontier is that now America has to turn itself inwards. It is no longer...
We've expanded as far as we're going to go.
We expanded as far as we have.
Right. Yeah. So now it's time to look in and say where
it is. And when you look, you don't see all men are created equal. You see drunk men beating their wives. You see these sweatshops growing up. Where are these immigrants living? They're living in slums and whatnot. Right. Give me a break. Yeah. And I think the answer would be, have you been to Europe lately? Mm. Right. And why are people coming here?
Right.
Because there's at least hope. Mm. And part of the progressives was to give in a sense, they said one is America is hopeless because the land of hope has gone up to the 19th century. But there's another sense in which the progressives are ever hopeful that we can do something about it. in the background of that speech, and so why did he mention equal opportunity? One is what I've just described to you, because the opposition is saying there isn't equal opportunity. So part of our platform is going to be bringing equal opportunity. Does that involve the government bringing it? Because there's a sense in which the Democratic Party is arguing that leaving it to the private sector, there's been a private collapse. This is even before the Depression.
That's right. Yeah, we're here. This
Right?
is 28.
So Hoover is defending America before the Depression, and as we've just talked about, you get these big, huge events that take place.
Yep.
And I think the American story is an interaction between events and ideas.
Yep.
And I think what these early progressives did was say the ideas do not have consequences. Consequences have ideas.
Very good.
Right?
Yes.
So what behind that speech is an attempt to defend rugged individualism. And the defense of rugged individualism is this is the land of equal opportunity. So Hoover pulls the notion of rugged individualism under the rubric of equal opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, what about rugged individualism? In the 19th century, there was this thesis developed by Darwin, survival of the species, survival of the fittest. And then you get, to what extent then is that the survival of the fittest in the water and growing up and whatnot, to what extent does that apply to political systems and to economic systems? And Spencer and Sumner, sort of the birth of a libertarian strand, say that things are laissez-faire,
Right.
which in its original meaning means leave alone. We're better off by leaving alone. So a certain libertarian spirit of we're all better, it's none of your business, leave alone. If you leave alone, the cash will come home.
Yep.
We'll do it. So the market works, everything. And so the government became a sort of an issue. And that was, and Hoover was a person who invented it, coined the term rugged individualism. As he came back from Europe. And the word individualism was opposite to collectivism, which he saw going on in Europe. And that the American idea of contribution was the individual.
I think that's an important topic to consider here, that context of where Europe was after World War I, utterly decimated, and these ideologies that are springing up, and Hoover's witnessing of that, and then coming back to the United States, a country obviously involved in World War I, but not anywhere nearly impacted by World War I, and understanding that some of those ideas were beginning to land in America as well. Now, I want to get to this origin story here in a second when we bring in FDR, but I wanted to cross into the 1930s, and the Depression obviously lands in 1929, within months of Hoover's inauguration, and we know the economic impacts, the incredibly high unemployment rates, the crash of the stock market, the poverty, and the other issues that resulted from that. But at the same time, Hoover is still arguing for many of these principles that he has stated in the nomination address back in 28. So here he is. I'm going to bring in a second quotation here from December of 1931. This is his annual message to Congress. Hoover notes, and I quote, "In these measures, we have striven to mobilize and stimulate private initiative and local and community responsibility. There has been the least possible government entry into the economic field, and that only in temporary and emergency form. Our citizens and our local governments have given a magnificent display of unity and action. initiative, and patriotism in solving a multitude of difficulties and in cooperating with the federal government. Now, at the time when he's saying this, U.S. unemployment stood around 19%. It was on its way up to 25% in the following year, into 1932. Was Hoover painting too rosy of a picture as to, he was certainly describing his own set of public policies in many ways, but was he painting too rosy of a picture as to what was the result of these policies?
Well, obviously he didn't think so.
Right.
The question is, when do we find out? When do we find out that he may have been painting too rosy a picture? Do we wait until later on? I mean, John Maynard Keynes hadn't come along yet.
Right.
That's 1936. Although certain elements of Keynesianism, where the government comes in to fix these things, the federal government comes to fix these things. You don't come in a cooperative manner, sit down in a room, let's talk about it, and share our responsibilities. That really doesn't come as in America until you get the federal government coming. I mean, there's a general suspicion in America of the federal government,
mm-hmm.
and that is, and so you need a theory why the federal government should be involved in the American context,
right.
And secondly, you need an event. Mm. And Hoover was thinking that we're going through this. Now, you look back and you say, well, what did cause the Great Depression? I mean, in a certain way, that's what you're getting at. I mean, Milton Friedman argued that it was the Federal Reserve System putting on the brakes when it should have put on the accelerator, put on the accelerator when it put on the brakes.
Right.
But he didn't work that out until 40 years later.
Right.
And Keynes wasn't along.
Right.
I mean, as a theory of unemployment, macroeconomics was not really a field.
Right.
So the alternative was Soviet centralization, or what? You didn't have that subtlety of Keynes, which is centralization without Soviet. I mean,
right.
that, right? And the reaction to that kind of thing in America is going to be, it's on the road to Soviet.
Right.
So I mean,
any step in that direction.
Every step in that direction. So I think Hoover is saying we've had depressions before, we've had ups and downs before. There is a peculiar reason for this, and he blamed it on Europe. Mm-hmm. If Europe had only done properly and not gone this direction, both politically and economically, we wouldn't be going through this. Mm. I mean, a small similarity. Why do we have these gas prices? Russia.
Yes.
Right. Or the progressive answer would be unequal privilege for those few owners of oil refineries.
Right.
Okay. So I think Hoover was saying things are getting better, and they did slightly get better before they got worse. Right. So there's a whole complicated set of reasons there. But what I think what he's getting at is, whatever the reasons are, they're going to be temporary. Whatever the reasons are, we don't want to go Europe. Mm. Okay? Mm-hmm. Whatever the reasons are, this is not justification for a massive change in what we might call the American system. Mm. The American system is separation of powers, localism, right. Private sectors, associations, Tocqueville. Right. Because see, Tocqueville, when you ask Tocqueville, why is America a success on a land of hope, whereas Europe is something he got a scholarship to leave, right? But now his scholarship ran out, he's going to go back, but he's going to write. Why is it? I mean, there are three reasons that Tocqueville gives as to why America is a potential success story. One is luck. Everybody needs luck. And the word luck then can be turned into land.
Right. And its location.
Land, location, etc. That's luck.
Right.
Right. Secondly, institutions. And so you got this, some things are state and local, some things are national or federal, and it's really, the way the founder set it up is the presumption was localism, as Hoover is saying, mm-hmm. But there's no reason why the people, in their deliberate sense, can't shift some things up. The problem is once you shift it up, it may not be able to come back down again. Okay, but there's nothing there there's nothing in the Constitution which suggests that there is no role for government. Right. In fact, in that there's a companion speech. That what we're focusing on is equal opportunity with rugged individualism, which is coming under attack. Right, that whole Spencer-Sumner thing of the left is coming after that libertarian approach, saying it's devil take the hindmost, meaning it's all about me, and if you didn't hear me first, it's all about me, right? And the community be darned.
And so back to Tocqueville, who would say self-interest rightly understood. Self-interest has become wrongly understood.
Right. That's correct. So exactly. Right. That would be the progressive critique. Right? Yeah. So what Hoover is doing in this speech is defending rugged individualism by placing it within the concept of equal opportunity. And that he said just like Tocqueville, so that there are these three things, right? Luck. Institutions, we've got an institutional framework that has worked, and what Tocqueville will call mores. Right. And what the way which Hoover expresses this mores is perhaps in the unfortunate phrase, rugged individualism, which he created. And by rugged, he means strong, self-reliant. I'm not a slave. Right. That's why that whole thing can go with it's connected with the 13th and 14th Amendment. Right. I mean, the first 10 amendments addresses a certain form of political slavery. Right. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment addresses the issue of human slavery. Right. And so what we have is rugged individualism in opposition to dependency, slavery. Right. So he doesn't mean rugged individualism in terms of devil take the hindmost. That's right. So because in the companion speech, which he gives in St. Louis, the whole point is to show what is the proper role for government. And he gives a list that government, the role of government and the federal government is within emergencies. But he also extends it to waterways and flood control and things like that.
There's an infrastructure piece to that.
Infrastructure.
That's right.
And certain folks might say, well, where does that say that in the Constitution? And the answer, of course, is where does it not say that in the Constitution? Right. Yeah. And so that over time, if it becomes the deliberate sense of the community, then that, but Hoover is strongly placed in localism and the whole Tocqueville model. It's unfortunate that he uses the phrase rugged individualism, which had a laissez-faire, because those terms had acquired a bad connotation by the time you get into the 20s.
No, he often uses the term cooperation, obviously here unity. There's a sense that this is not an individualism, which, as you have rightly said, is devil take the hindmost. It's an individualism set apart from the federal government. There is still a cooperation that's happening locally. There's an expectation as a self-governing individual that you are contributing to your community, that you are working with others to solve these problems in common.
So, that's right. And so what has happened in Charles Beard, very, very influential.
Right.
Progressive historian. And one of the things he wrote is an economic interpretation of the Constitution. And his point was, what you really need to know about the Constitution is who wrote it. And for Beard, the lens is who owns the means of production. I mean, it's a good old classic 19th century, maybe even soft Marxist, socialism for America. So who owns it? And he goes through and he shows, well, you've got this person owning this, you got that person owning that. So therefore, this really is, so it's the economic interpretation of the Constitution. It's not what kind of economic system does the Constitution encourage, which I think is the interesting question, which is when I picked up the book, I thought what I was going to read.
About the commercial republic that this
That's right.
creates.
And the Constitution supports it by what? Congress has the power to encourage the arts and sciences, the practical arts and sciences, right? Permits patents for a limited time. Who would have thought that Disney would have got a patent for 50 years, right? All right, so you talk about it, right? But it's a certain encouragement. And there's an encouragement of an interstate commerce between the states because there are no tariffs between each state.
Which there was at the time.
Right. So when I say economic interpretation of the Constitution, I think what kind of economy, a political economy, does the Constitution sort of encourage?
Right.
But that's not Baird. Right. It's the economic holdings of those who wrote, and that model had a profound impact on the progressive movement, and it's had a profound impact ever since. But not just simply who owns the means of production in terms of writing it, but you can do substitutes, like it was a white man who wrote it. Therefore, that's all I need to know, or whatever.
So the Constitution, in Beard's vision, really becomes a protection racket for...
A protection racket is exactly.
As opposed to setting the groundwork for freedom and flourishing.
That's right. So in the companion piece that he did, the St. Louis piece, he shows what a constructive role for government would be, a constructive role for federal government, consistent with the constitutional framework of self-reliance. If he'd only used the term self-reliance, but at the same time that Baird wrote this economic interpretation, he wrote called The Myth of Rugged Individualism, where his whole point is that America is not a land of rugged people going around. It's these few who are, that's right, the robber barons who are doing it. So, and when they get into trouble, what do? Who do they call? The Ghostbusters, right?
The government.
The government busters. So what are we talking about laissez-faire?
Right.
I mean, what are we talking about rugged individualism?
Well, now we're going to go there. So Dr. Lloyd, I want to move our attention now to FDR because obviously an opponent has entered the field. We're now in 1932, which is the next election year. And for Roosevelt, the person who had supported Hoover for presidency back in 1924, things have changed. And he is now beginning to rise as a possible opponent. Obviously, he's governor of New York at this point, and he is viewing not only the government's response to the Depression differently, but he is also looking back at the 1920s differently. And so to begin, I wanted to pull from a commencement address that he gave in May of 1932 in Georgia at Oglethorpe University. And obviously he's speaking to a class that's graduating in 1932 who came into college in 1928. So this is a graduating class that has really experienced a very different world from the one they entered into the one that they're graduating into. And so Roosevelt remarks, and I quote, "I have no doubt that you have been impressed by its," and by that he means the Depression and the federal government's response to it, "its chaos, its lack of plan. Perhaps some of you use stronger language, and stronger language is justified. Even if you had been graduating instead of matriculating in those colored days of 1928, you would, I believe, have perceived this condition. For beneath all the happy optimism of those days, there existed a lack of plan and a great waste," unquote. Now, this goes to the point that you were raising before, that even as many, this was the Roaring Twenties that he's speaking of, right? That for many, that was seen as a halcyon time in American economic history. That even looking back then, FDR is introducing another view of that. and not almost so much saying that the Depression was this unique event that, yes, the government was not responding rightly to the Depression. He was saying actually the seeds for the Depression were sown in the 1920s. Talk a bit about how this side, this face of liberalism that FDR is now bringing onto the public square, views that period in the 1920s far differently.
Well, no, I think that's very important because one face of liberalism emphasizes the self-reliant individual and limited government, limited federal government. This other face of liberalism is really asking a question that Ronald Reagan asked 78, well, 50, at least 50 years later. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? You come in 1928 with great hope. You leave in 1932 without a job. So you're not better off than you were 4 years ago. In fact, the whole country is. So let us explain this phenomenon. And the answer is absence of planning. If the universities had only planned properly, they would not be in this chaotic situation. So there's a confrontation in that speech to what we might call rugged individualism, properly understood in Hoover's position of self-reliant,
right,
equal opportunity, versus Roosevelt's notion of rugged individualism is really devil take the hindmost. It's really chaos. Don't fall for that. Just look at your own life. Mm-hmm. And there's a companion speech to that, which is the Commonwealth Club address.
Yes, which we'll get to.
All right.
You ready?
Well, I'm ready. I think I'm ready. Let's go for it. Yeah.
Well, I just want to pick up this theme about waste and efficiency in what might be described as even though it never truly was, a laissez-faire economy. This is something that in the planning, this is what Roosevelt appears to be responding to, that the role of government is not so much to plan every increment of economic activity, so much as it is to say the capitalism that we have naturally results in waste. The government's role is not to dominate or assume ownership of the means of production like socialism, but it is essentially to eliminate waste and to spread this wealth, if you will, more equitably, which again is a far different, as you've said before, a far different vision of the federal government's role in the economy, but still, to try to give FDR his due, is not going to the extent where government is owning the means of production as we have in socialism.
Yeah, that's correct. At that time, despite all the agencies which are created, the alphabet soup, right, the whole Roosevelt solution, there's only one or two that one could strictly say is government owned, and government owning means that's TVA.
Right, Tennessee Valley Authority.
Right. All the others are highly regulated.
Right.
So that the planning and regulation go together. So if we could regulate what the markets do, because the markets don't work properly. There's what we're talking about is market failure.
Right.
So we now get in market failure, government solution. Later on, you'll get government failure, market solution. And that kind of back and forth so Hoover is coming from a tradition that says, if you leave the market alone, things will turn out all right. There's something about the invisible hand that works. And then once you introduce planning.
And again, not just to interject here, he is still looking back to Europe. We do have a precedent to show where overly active engagement into the economy by government is showing itself to be a failure as well.
Yeah, that's right. And Hoover doesn't go into this, but he goes into it in terms of his rugged individualism speech, which is 1922, but now becomes part of that Madison Square Garden. But von Hayek in right after wrote the Road to Serfdom, and that became very influential. It seems to me in intellectual circles for the rebirth of a conservative movement. What Hayek's point was, the Road to Serfdom started in Europe in the 1890s when European intellectuals gave up on the liberal democratic model, that face of liberalism. They turned away from that face, and they faced the idea of, but so it took a while to get to America.
Yeah.
And then when it got to America, it was Americanized. So what you get is not owning the means of production kind of socialism.
Right.
You get, the federal government is now going to plan.
Right.
And part of the planning is, you can see it in Roosevelt's solutions, the Agricultural Act, the Industrial Recovery Act.
Right.
I mean, you read those propositions in them. The federal government is involved in decision making. It doesn't own it, but it decides.
Now, we're not at the election yet. We know where we're going to head. Again, we're in 1932, and I want to get to that Commonwealth Club speech. And again, to look at FDR's view of the role of government. At the same time, I want to discuss some things rhetorically that I think are important to understand, that FDR introduces really for the first time into our political rhetoric, things that when I quote here, I think are going to resonate with our viewers and listeners, because many of the rhetorical themes that FDR introduces in the discussion around political economy, government and economy, are things that we're still terms or frameworks that we're still using today. So 1932, September, we're still a couple months away from the election. FDR is speaking at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco. And I'm going to quote this passage here. As I see it, the task of government in its relation to business is to assist the development of an economic declaration of rights, an economic constitutional order. This is the common task of statesmen and businessmen. It is the minimum requirement of a more permanently safe order of things. Every man has a right to life, and this means that he has also a right to make a comfortable living. Now, the use of rights language, if you will, away from Hoover and how he understood those rights constitutionally, but into the economic realm, which is going to, certainly with FDR, is going to ipso facto require government action. Talk a bit about that transition in the use of rights language to apply to economic results.
Okay. I think Hoover is still operating within, I'm collapsing a whole bunch of things that's going, but operating within an understanding of rights that comes out of the founding, which is not just simply voting rights, but voting rights are important. Rights that the role of government is to protect, that comes from nature, nature's God, through Declaration of Independence and through the idea of the Gettysburg Address, and so the role of government is essentially to protect rights that are already there, that have been given to you as by what it means to be human, even if they're not there in practice. I think one of the things we need to be clear is that, yeah, sure, I look around here and I can see that person is not as equal to that person, but that situation is not something that is inherited and inevitable through the generations forever and ever. You're not born by nature into that. It may be born because you're living in a certain serfdom system or communism or whatever. That's where you are. It's not from the guidance of nature. Okay, right. So Hoover is still within that notion of rights come from God, rights come from nature, and it's the role of government to protect those rights.
Right.
Therefore, it's going to have limited government unless to protect those rights you have to go temporarily doing this. I think Roosevelt's key line in that Commonwealth Club that guides that is equal opportunity as we know it is dead. So he's going after equal opportunity, just as you introduce Hoover notion that everything depends upon that equal opportunity, which he links to what I've just described as the founders and Lincoln. Roosevelt's point is, we've tried all of that. That life is over. Rugged individualism has now been criticized and revealed for what it is. Turner, the Commonwealth Club is a pretty long speech in which he's just, in fact, given a history of America.
That's right.
Through Turner's eyes.
That's right.
So rugged individualism has really become robber baronism. And a key, equal opportunity as we've known is dead. So, where do we go from here? It's really fascinating. David Davenport are writing about this, and it's a really difficult. Does that mean then that Roosevelt drops equal opportunity, right? Or does he say it's good, but now we have to get there, right. And under laissez-faire, whatnot, we're not getting there. Therefore, we require planning. Yes. We require the role of government in order to bring equal opportunity. So that I think this rights doctrine is that somewhere, somehow, we have a right to fair housing, we have a right to and that really comes out in the second inaugural.
That's right. And we get to the four freedoms.
And the four freedoms and all that. So those are not freedoms or rights that are granted by government rather than by nature. So that
this is a big change, especially in the realm of political economy.
And particularly, yes, in the realm of the American conversation. So that government now grants rights, or rights which are not listed either explicitly or implicitly in the, let's say, the founders Lincoln model that in Hoover's hands it gets Hooverized, right? Hoovered, to use the British term, but it's not fine.
That's right.
A household name,
yes.
To Hoover, and so that you've now introduced planning.
Yes.
And you've introduced it in a certain way in which people can maybe understand it. Waste.
Yes.
And because
Inefficiency,
which is really capitalistic language.
Right.
You're not introducing it in socialist language.
Right. Yes.
So planning gets justified and implemented in an American way. So if that's the case, he says the age of the entrepreneur is over.
Right.
All right. Now that's a big statement.
It is.
And he says, so what we have now, we are now in the age of the enlightened administrator, which means that we've changed essentially the economic question from production to distribution. We're producing enough. There's so much waste.
That's right.
We're not distributing it properly,
right.
or redistributing it properly.
Yeah.
And with the help of the income tax, and you can't say that's a plot because it's passed by an amendment, right?
Yeah.
We can fix that. By the Interstate Commerce Clause, that's not an invention.
Yeah.
That's American.
Right.
It's there. We're going to do the Interstate Commerce Clause. We're going to go necessary and proper clause. We're going to stretch them. We're going to have a living constitution.
Yeah.
But we hope we can still do it within this constitutional framework.
Right. Yeah. Now, another element which you just touched on here, but I think it's important as we think about the way that we think about politics and public policy today is, and there's going to be a response here from Hoover, but FDR's introduction of this language critical of a certain class of society.
Yeah.
And so FDR is obviously elected in 1932, and I wanted to pull from his first inaugural address, which At the time, inaugurations happened in March, so this was March of 1933, to really discuss how FDR's way of separating different political classes or economic classes was a big part of how he used rhetoric to move what was going to be his New Deal platform of public policies forward. He said this in the first inaugural address, 1933, quote, "The money changers have fled from their high seats in the temple of our civilization. We may now restore that temple to the ancient truths. The measure of the restoration lies in the extent to which we apply social values more noble than mere monetary profit." A lot of biblical language, especially Old Testament language, in this first inaugural address. Now, obviously, that has morphed in many ways to the haves and have-nots, and more recently, the 1% and the 99%. But for Americans, especially at the level of presidential politics, this was really one of the first times that this kind of rhetoric was used. And so talk a little bit about, because Hoover's going to respond to this, but this class rhetoric was used in political discourse.
Well, class rhetoric in political discourse was widespread in Europe in the 19th century. And the most famous class specialist of them all is Marx, in which he said, let's take all this nonsense away and let's really boil it down. What is politics? Class struggle. And so that Marx would say, you're born into a class. In effect, Marx accepts the feudalistic breakdown of who you are. You're born into a class. Serf, lord, such and such, this and that, right?
The way you start is the way you finish.
Right. So where you finish. Now, the twist on that for Marx is that the industrial system has arrived and replaced the agricultural system, so that you're now born into, do you own the means of production, or are you a laborer? And that is inevitable, one or the other. And then you pass it down, which is why we need a progressive income tax to try to stop that. But Marx is certainly part of that whole class analysis. But it's not and the opposition to him is, all right, we think that is, but we can correct it. So you get sort of what he calls, is really insulting, bourgeois socialists, who want to have a sort of socialism
Light.
Exactly, which means they don't want to overthrow the bourgeoisie. But don't you see, the only way to get rid of class is to get rid of class. And fortunately, history's on our side, but we'll push it along a bit, just in case it has a little nod off. We'll give it a little, hey, wake up.
That's right.
Right, be on the right side. And the left side. So, I mean, that framework has been in Europe. It has really been absent in the American framework, except the Sumner Spencer business is where you first get the concept of the forgotten man. And I'm not going to be able to get the algebra correctly, but let's just go with the algebra. You got three, A, B, C. So they're sort of classes, but they're three groups of people. And A is the enlightened administrator, who's been to schools and learned about public policy and education, therefore has a toolkit and whatnot. And B is the taxpayer, who really pays the taxes, and that's sort of the upper class, right? And then you got C, who's the sort of the lower classes. And their argument is, and this is in the 19th century also, is that here's the problem. You've got A, who's the administrator, who persuades or compels B, who's the taxpayer, to give relief policies to C. So in that model, the forgotten man is the taxpayer, right? He doesn't matter. What matters is what Roosevelt does is to switch who the forgotten man is. Yeah. The forgotten man is not the taxpayer. The forgotten man is the man who wants to work, wants to take care of his family, but somehow the system has let him down. Mm-hmm. And so the model, so Roosevelt, I think, very, you wouldn't hear Marx using that Old Testament language.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? I mean, even if Roosevelt doesn't believe a word of it, yeah. Right? You wouldn't hear Marx doing that. Right. He just thinks that would be just another opiate for the masses. Right. But Roosevelt is not giving opiate for the masses. I don't think. I think he's reaching out to Americans who understand the Bible and biblical language.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And he's explaining to them what is going on. So a cynic would say, well, he's just giving a veil a cover. Yeah. Well, I think you could say that, but...
Well, at another stage, in another speech, FDR says that we have finally returned Washington, D.C. into the hands of the federal government, essentially making a comment that it's been in the hands of the money changers for too long. Right.
Exactly. That's exactly. It's been in the hands of the money. Now, the other person who did biblical language was Lincoln.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And Hoover does too, right?
What's that?
Hoover does too.
Oh, yes.
So I want to get to, as we're nearing the end, and I just, as we looked to our next few minutes together, I want to get to a couple lightning round questions, but I wanted to have one last quotation here from The Two Faces of Liberalism, because one of the great things about this book is it shows that even though Hoover has lost the election, obviously in 32, he stays around. Yeah. He's very involved in public discourse, and he sees after the New Deal programs come into effect, he is still very much in the public square critiquing these policies, and he has reason to, given what he perceives, and I think rightly so, is the lack of real impact that these massive government spending and regulatory policies are having on the Depression, which obviously trudges along throughout the 1930s. So here he is at the Republican National Convention in the following election cycle, 1936. Hoover attacks the New Deal, what he calls it's not a true American policy or set of policies. And so looking back over the prior 4 years of FDR's term, Hoover states, and I quote, "Any examination of the economic muddle of the past 3 years shows the constant threat of price fixing, restriction of production, and drive against small business. That is the soul of monopoly. That is maintained from the NRA to the last tax bill. These are old tricks in no new disguise which put shackles upon the freedom of men." So what we're seeing now is this discussion of two different monopolies, right? FDR has said that we have now returned Washington, D.C. into the hands of the federal government. Here we are 4 years later, and essentially what Hoover is saying, there can be a monopolistic power exercised by that same government, that it's not just the robber barons, that you can see a monopolistic power exercised without success, as we're seeing here in 1936. Unemployment rates are still high. We still have numerous economic challenges. Poverty rates still very high. So your thoughts on how Hoover now is setting up this new dynamic of when government can assume the role of a monopoly?
Okay, now the word monopoly is a word which is very familiar to those who like free enterprise, competition, etc. So he's using language, applying the mono part, that is the mon part that's usually been used in politics is monarchy. Right. And in economics, it's been monopoly, right, rather than monarchy.
Single, right.
But what he's saying, and not too subtly, is that we're having a return to monarchy. Mm. but using the word monopoly. And notice what is, and so underneath that question is where, you could ask very easily, what has happened to the state governments? So that politics now has been monopolized.
This is his
in
point about
Washington.
saying that these are old tricks. Because in some ways, the New Deal can be seen as an utterly new
Well,
set
what's
of
new about
policy.
the New Deal?
Right.
Well, it replaces the fair deal,
Yeah. Right.
right? And it replaces, Teddy Roosevelt had a deal,
Right.
and Wilson had a deal.
Right.
And now one has a fair deal, the other one had the new freedom, so now we have the new deal.
Right.
And all we want is fair
combine-
freedom.
That's
Let's have fair freedom, you know. So I think the language, the American language is there, but monopoly means that what has happened to state and local governments? What has happened to associations? What has happened to the traditional way, infrastructure of American solving problems? It has been wiped out or it's on the way out. So
Or crowded out, as
crowded out.
economists.
And so if we want to use this, because I love it if I'm going to use it. Hoover's question is, are you better off today than you were 4 years ago?
Very good.
But the answer is, well, there's always hope now,
That's right.
right? And we got a plan for it.
Yeah.
And we've got a...
And we understand there's a forgotten man.
We see what the forgotten man man relates
Yes.
to the forgotten man. And now this forgotten man is no longer the taxpayer. It's the person who deserves to have education, deserves to have these four freedoms. I mean, in the four freedoms, what Roosevelt has done is taken two of them, which are traditional, right? And added two which are not traditional.
Right.
And so the difference in the role of government that you're introduced, that you point here, I mean, if we had to put Hoover and Roosevelt within those four freedoms, the two that Hoover defines himself would be the first two.
First two. Right.
And the New Deal is the adding of these two new freedoms.
Right. And of course, Hoover is now questioning, are you really getting those?
Yeah, right.
At what cost?
That's right. And in his 1938 speech, he looks back and he says, well, let's say, through all of this New Deal now, by the way, what was the rate of unemployment
That's right.
in 1932?
Right.
Okay. By the way, what is the rate of unemployment 6 years later? So if the job of the New Deal was to solve the economic problem of unemployment, it had. But what has the New Deal solved? And interesting, I think that it comes out of the second inaugural. We have transformed the American people from being rugged individuals in the worst way we can imagine the rugged individuals.
Self-interest wrongly
We
understood.
understood. We have now transformed them into a community,
A national community.
a national community where we look out for each other.
Well, I think that there's going to be another conversation about delving more deeply into the policies, but I wanted to set these rhetorical pieces here just because I think they're so relevant to many of today's conversations. Now, I want to conclude with 3 lightning round questions.
Oh, Lord.
And so very quickly as we go through, but I think, I'm thinking maybe many of our viewers, there are certain perceptions, in some cases myths, of the Great Depression and the response of the New Deal. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on 3 quick questions. First, some argue that FDR's aggressive government interventionism was necessary to find an off-ramp, if you will, from the possibility of America becoming socialist. This goes back to the conversation that we have had often about what would be the influence of these European ideologies in America. Do you see FDR's and policies and rhetoric as providing a way short of or a way off from America actually becoming socialist? Because there were socialist political movements in the United States throughout this period.
If socialism were to do very well in America, it would have been during this period.
Right.
and they didn't.
Right.
I mean, they did fairly well,
Yeah.
but not not in a defining sense. He certainly had advisors who were so inclined. But your point about he used American rhetoric,
Yeah.
and he used rhetoric that Lincoln used, that America is the last best hope of mankind.
Yes.
And there is nothing anti-American. I mean, it's that his language, what he's using, is not anti-American,
Right.
right? So, so I would say, yeah, what happened to the socialist movement after the New Deal came along? It went into the intellectual circles.
That's right.
And then what happened is that unionism reached its peak,
Yeah.
and afterwards it declined. So that I think that Roosevelt could make the argument, which he did. Say, I'm saving capitalism from the capitalists,
Yeah.
and I'm making capitalism work for the forgotten man.
Yeah.
I have really no intention of becoming a monopolist socialist.
And so he would say, and I think this is a very good distinction, he would say that he's saving capitalism from the capitalists, but not saving America from socialism. Do you think?
Well, yeah, okay. He doesn't. I don't think he. But he does say at one point, if it weren't for me, the socialists would be much stronger.
Okay.
Right? And in his, it really requires a sort of a blink when you read it at first. He gives this talk to capitalists in which he says, I'm a capitalist. I'm here to save capitalism. And you say, well, what can't this guy say?
Right.
But if you put it in terms of that, you guys don't know how to save yourselves.
Right.
And I certainly don't want America. By the way, it won't go that way.
Right.
There's something about the American spirit,
Yeah.
which rugged individualism, properly understood and properly nurtured,
Yeah. Yeah.
survives.
Yeah. I was just not going to stand that. Another question, often considered as it relates to the New Deal. Many have argued that it was really World War II that ended the Depression, and it wasn't this vast set of public policy prescriptions put forth in the New Deal. How do you view the history there?
Well, I think there's some truth to that, because pretty much everybody was employed, and there's a shortage of workers, and that women went into the workforce. So there's a certain truth for solving the New Deal. If the New Deal was supposed to solve unemployment, one could say really that World War II put people to. But all right, so is the solution for one bad catastrophe getting people to go into war? Is that what we're getting at? I don't think the person or people who hold that position would say that. I think my understanding of that statement, that it's World War II that got us, is a statement that says the New Deal did not solve the problem which the New Deal was supposed to solve, which was unemployment. And that by the time you get to World War II, you have pretty much zero unemployment.
Right.
And I think that's all it's trying to get at.
Yeah.
I don't think it's trying to get at
Some of the other impacts of
some of the impacts of. I mean, one could say now that now that Ukraine has been bombed to smithereens, you're not going to have any unemployment anymore.
Right.
You're going to have a lot of bricks to pick up.
Right.
You have a lot of things to do.
Yeah.
To be sure, events and ideas are intertwined.
Yeah. Last question. This is more broad-based. What do you see as the major takeaway from the FDR Hoover debate? It certainly seems like when we think about our politics and policy today, that many of the concepts introduced by FDR, certainly in our political rhetoric, remain today. As you say, even the term rugged individualism is seen by many Americans as just being anachronistic and frankly something selfish as opposed to as you say, how he really determined and defined it. What do you see as a major takeaway from those debates in the 1930s?
Well, as you introduced this conversation, you were saying that what you got out of the book was that the New Deal, the Hoover Roosevelt debate, both before the New Deal and during the New Deal, has shows how much it has shaped subsequent public policy. Yeah. And I see that. I mean, now you have sort of like a core conservative movement, which is to properly define what individualism is, to properly define what constitutionalism is, and to what extent can you limit the role of government. And I just don't see now, after 70, 80 years, that that the deliberate sense of the community would want a dismantling of many, certainly not Social Security, which was introduced as an insurance program. I don't see them wanting to dismantle now through the time some of the Medicare, Medicaid approaches,
which come later, but we'll talk about those.
Right. But so I see there's certain things, whether by attrition or by acceptance or whatever, are not going to go away. And to anticipate a subsequent conversation, Ronald Reagan voted for Roosevelt at least 2 or 3 times. Right. And he never did fight the New Deal. Right. So there's a certain part in which the New Deal has become part of our life, certain part of it. And so the role of government is a hard, what should the role of the federal government be, is a sort of a conservative question today, that may make people's eyes go up, because, well, sure, the federal government has an important role. But we can see in today's debates that what is the role of the federal government still goes on. The role of the individual in society. I mean, there's a huge libertarian movement in the United States, despite the New Deal, or maybe because of the New Deal. So I don't think these ideas have gone away. They've come up in different ways, different forms.
But they were really set by...
They're really set. I mean, for example, I think one of the legacy of Hoover, the positive legacy of Hoover, is there is an emergency role for government, but we should be able to do things by ourselves, which raises an important question: what sort of things can we do by ourselves anymore? And I think one of the legacies of the Roosevelt is the reliance on the enlightened administrator. That only the enlightened administrator, or what we call scientists today, you follow the science. So that's a legacy. Even though Hoover was well informed about all that, he wouldn't turn to an enlightened administrator. It would be the enlightened cooperator. He would bring people together in a room and sit them down and say, all right.
Some from government, some without.
Exactly, but we're Americans.
That's right, yeah. Well, Dr. Lloyd, that sounds like a perfect place to end. Thanks so much.
Dean Peterson, you're welcome.
Well, that will conclude this session on the 2 Faces of Liberalism, the next in our Roots of Political Economy series. For more information and some of these texts, again, I encourage you to pick up this terrific book, The 2 Faces of Liberalism, and check out our website at the School of Public Policy, publicpolicy.pepperdine.edu, and search specifically for the civics education page with original texts, and you'll find more information there. Thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Hi, Pete Peterson again at the School of Public Policy. Thanks for watching this video. To support future video and event productions, please click on the link below and support our work. Thanks so much.